Good morning, everybody. My name is Angelo. I'm a lecturer in the School of Modern Languages at Cardiff University. And today I would like to talk about the combined use of short story and modern literature in a language class learning. I have done this recording of the video for what I did with my students year 2. And basically, okay, these are the short story that I have selected. I have selected 3 short story, 2 from Giovanni Guareschi and 1 from Luigi Pirandello. I have selected a short story because usually it means that as a short plot, usually he has a very clear story within it, most of the time a moral story, and it is written to have an immediate effect on the people to read it. 2, as I said, is from Giovanni Guareschi. 1 is from Luigi Pirandello. In the second semester, what I did with my students is basically to read a novel of an important Italian writer, who actually is not a writer, as I tell you in a second, and is Se questo è un uomo. What I did in my class is this. I selected the short story for 2 main reasons. 1, I want my students to see the inner theme that connects all the stories. And the second point is to see the difference in the use of the language that the author were able to do or to explore within the short story, and to make a comparison also with a novel in the second semester for the theme and for the language. As you probably know, Guareschi is a good Italian writer. And he used the language of the 1950s, 1960s. Very famous because he has created a character called Don Camillo, and he wrote about books. But not many people know that he also was a journalist. And in fact, he was a journalist who became a writer, and that is very important. Whereas Pirandello, the language of Pirandello is the language of Sicily at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, which is completely different. I don't have a lot of time here to contextualize things, but I have at least to tell you a bit the plot of the story to understand what I did and how I did it. So the first short story, Un ottimo affare, is basically a story of 2 characters, Giovannino, who is Guareschi himself, and his wife, Margherita. They have 2 bikes, but because the 2 kids of their family, they play with the bikes, they put them in the bathroom, they put them in the bedroom, they decided to sell these bikes. They think that they don't need the bikes anymore, they don't want the bike anymore. Therefore, they decided to sell them. Just to realize, after a couple of days after, that they missed the bikes terribly. So they rush back to the market and they see that 1 bike has already been sold. So they use all the money they got from selling the bike to buy back the only bike that is left there. And I want my students to understand that this is a journey into the past, the journey that shows that the past does not go away, and the moral story is the small value given to money in compare to objects that represent 1 part of your life, 1 part that you are about to lose. The second short story from Guareschi, Giretto 136, is another journey. And journey is the main theme that connects all the stories in the first semester and with the book that I use in the second semester. But it's not a normal journey, it's an emotional journey, it's a journey into a role that someone has within the family. Again, is Giovanni Guareschi, the main protagonist, but this time, he doesn't talk about himself. He talks about himself via a use of a metaphor. He used a metaphor of a train conductor, and he talks about this story of this train conductor who drives this train, the Diretto 136. And this Diretto 136, every day he reaches the final curve. On the right, there is a girl waving at the train conductor from one of her windows out. So as this scene repeats itself every day, one day, the train conductor decided to stop, get out of the train, and went to talk to the girl. And he's very puzzled when the girl said, "Oh, I'm not interested in you. I'm interested in the train conductor of Diretto 136. And he said, "I am the one. So oh no, you are not the one, because the train is there and you are here. So that is a separation in this case between the person and the role itself. And by doing what he did, the director of the train conductor have lost his role, have lost the girl, although he has never had it, and he has also lost one part of himself, because he has done something that he has never done before. And he's Guareschi here saying to his wife, I am the director, the train conductor of Diretto 136, and I don't know sometimes if I want to keep on staying in the family, keeping all the problems, etc., or I want to get out and risk myself, my life, my role outside in a big world. So these are two of the themes that I have explored with my students. And in terms of the language, I'll come back to this in a second after the third short story, okay? And in terms of the language, we can see that there is a lot of use of direct speech to describe the situation between character and event. And there is a lot of use of colloquial expression, like villanzone, like mettersi d'accordo, non ti interessa un fico secco, dare I numeri, and a very short narration of fact and event, and a very short narration of the places where the events take place, the scene, almost nothing. If you move to the third short story, this is another journey, but this time is a journey into oneself. The character, one of the main characteristics of Pirandello characters is that through events, through the story, through humorism, they are able to fight the event, and by fighting the event, they look into themselves and they become someone else. And this story is a story of a protagonist, Adriana Braggi, who has never left her village in Sicily, but because she is sick, she needs to cure herself. She travels with her brother-in-law, with whom eventually she will fall in love, and she travels to Palermo, to Naples, Milan, and then eventually she will die in Venice. And I have chosen this story because, different from two stories, is a journey again, but into yourself. And the protagonist is a woman, and if you think about that, it's revolutionary that almost 100 years ago we have the possibility to see a woman try to change her condition, because, as you probably know, allow me to say, but in the past, the women were simply properties, in inverted commas. They shift from the hands of the father to the hands of the husband. So it's amazing and revolutionary, and that's why I want my students to see that Pirandello put a woman as a protagonist and show that her, through her fighting, were able to change her situation. In terms of the language, there is a use of old-fashioned Italian word that my student would never come across otherwise if I hadn't selected this book. Per esempio, for instance, non aveva mai dato un passo fuori dal paese, instead of saying non era mai uscito dal paese. Le donne attendevano a far figliuoli, instead of saying avevano dei figli. Il decoro del casato poteva scapitare, instead of essere danneggiato. So these are the differences with the use of the language and the short story of Guareschi and the short story of Pirandello. How I went about it, I'll just try to contextualize. I read the story myself, I record myself, I read the story, and I placed the story in Learning Central. And I asked my students to listen, so they can listen my pronunciation, and then I asked them to go and read the story themselves. Similarities and differences. Un ottimo affare, a good bargain. Of course, it's not a good bargain because they spend the same money to buy one bike for the two that they have sold, is a journey into the past, whereas Diretto 136 is a journey into feelings, the feelings of a man who tried to say, I want to stay in my family, or I don't want to stay. And a journey into oneself is Il Viaggio. I ask my students, because these are short stories, every 3 weeks they have to read a short story. And then we have 1 hour in class devoted to talk about that and explore the character. And then we move on and we make a comparison with the previous story. And then we move on for 3 more weeks and we make a comparison with all short story. And usually in week 11, we talk about all the short story in semester one. Some of the comments of the students are here. Some of them told me in all the stories, the characters are prisoner of their families, although in a different ways. And they try to react to this situation by escaping into the world like Guareschi, or escaping in themselves like Pirandello, which is a great comment. Of course, they don't do this by themselves. Before reading the short story with them, I give them some tips. Look at this theme. For instance, I told them, look, I put the journey, the theme of the journey, as one of the possible theme without telling them is the only one. But I said, look at the theme of the journey, look at the theme of freedom, look at the theme of friendship, look at the theme of, and then we make them together. Especially from a linguistic point of view, I wanted them to underline, not all of them saw them, but that there is a great use of direct speech in Guareschi. Why? Because he's a journalist. He's I'm not going to say this in a very negative way, but he's a journalist. So he writes in the same way as he was presenting them to a reader that was reading an article in a newspaper. There is a very much use of present and present perfect. And I tell my students in the north of Italy, where Guareschi is from, most of the time we use present perfect rather than past absolute. And the description of things, there are almost no description of scenes where this happened. There is just a description of event. It is as if this event is happening in front of him right now. And it's a very characteristic way of writing. Whereas in Pirandello, they can see that the language is completely different. First of all, there is a great use of adjective. Second, there is a narration and description of scene, and the events are contextualized within the scene. And most of the time, as neutral narration, as it is in the majority of the book, is used, but the past absolute is used to have this narration. And this is what I wanted my students to see. In this way, with these three short stories, students can learn two different ways of writing, two different ways of vocabulary, two different ways of the use of the language. And in this case, most of them, they have to read the short story more than once in order to understand. First, by themselves for 2 or 3 weeks, depending how the short story is. And then I need to make sure that with them, with everybody that comes to the class, not all the time everybody attends, but everybody comes to the class, me and them together, we make the main point, so that when they come to the oral exam, everybody knows what we have talked about in relation to the plot and in relation to the language. Based on this, based on the ability that they have achieved to start reading a short story, in the second semester, we try to face a novel. A book. Clearly, a book is very different from a short story. First, because most of the time is longer. Second, because there is a different way of narrating. Third, because clearly, when they read a book, they have to read in a different way than a short story. In a short story, in a couple of hours, 3 hours, they can finish. A book in his days. Plus, they have to remember what happened to the character individually and the different scene when they move on in the book. Otherwise, they lose the plot. So we do this in class. I contextualize the book first, and then I also try to tell them the way in which they have to read. I did not record myself this time in reading the book. I simply asked them, from this day to this day, you read these pages, from this day to this day to those pages, and then every 2 weeks, we make a point in class together about every 2-3 chapters. And why did I choose this book? Oh, because it's very different from the majority of the other author that I have experienced, and also because it's different from the way of writing of the short story in the first semester. Primo Levi is not a professional writer. He's not a writer at all. In fact, he has a degree in chemistry. And because of this, he writes in a completely different way, not only because he's not a writer, but also because the main point of the book is simply a description. He is a witness who describes things for people to remember, for people not to forget the Holocaust. So this, again, is a journey into a human and collective tragedy, the Holocaust, but in a form of a diary. Every day, something happened. There are many themes, within this book. We don't have a time, but just what we highlighted with the students together in our point. The students were able to tell me that there is a theme of lies, in the sense the Nazi lie to the prisoner, and at the same time the prisoner lie to each other because they have to survive. They have to steal things, to steal food from each other. There is a theme of freedom. My student said, freedom is not in the hand of Primo Levi when he was captured, has never been in his hand because he was prisoner. And even when he got free, is because the Russian arrived to the camp. So they were able to see that within this, freedom has never been one of the things available for Primo Levi. Beauty does not exist. People do not exist, but especially, and that's one of the points that I'm particularly pleased, understanding. Because the prisoner, they come from different parts of Europe, France, Italy, Germany, wherever, they all speak different languages. And here with my students, we highlighted the fact that study languages nowadays, in the past, this is an example, of course, give you the possibility to talk to another person, to enter in another person's background. And the example of the prisoner in the camp was very important to show to them. Only the people who were able to speak another language were able to communicate, were able not to survive necessarily, but were able to make connection with others. There is I selected this book also because there is a very particular use of the language. The Nazis use transfer instead of deporting. They use special treatment instead of killing. They use final solution instead of extermination. So I said to my students, this is one great use of the language, because the language can also be used for deceiving, for concealing, for not telling what you want. And this is an example what has been done in the past, using different words to mean different things is one of the power that you can have in the language. And also, because we are in a concentration camp, because there is a hierarchy, the people are always shouting in imperative. So I showed to my students the constant use of the imperative tense in order to show them that, you see, this is a language of command. In the language of command, most of the time is used, the imperative tense is used. And given that the imperative is one of the topic, the grammar topic that I cover in year 2, at the end of semester 1 and beginning of semester 2, it was important to show this in use. If I have to draw some line in relation to what I have done, my personal experience is that students, by reading the short story and by reading a novel, can learn Italian language by analyzing a plot, making connection, not simply making fill in the gaps of grammar exercise or short reading in class. These are different things that help them to understand which are the inner connection, the inner theme that they connect all the story, and also to see the language in use and in a context. They can improve their ability to read, to understand, and to describe a story in another language, because they have first to read, then to understand, and then to repeat with their own words. They improve their ability to summarize. If, for instance, one day have a job interview and they have to describe in a very quick way different situation, they need to have the ability to summarize. And here, by reading a short story and telling me only the main point, they can practice this ability, a short story or also a book. They increase their spoken ability also during the final exam, because of course I prepared them before. In the past, I used also to have language assistant coming from Italy, and they used to revise the story with them, and then coming to the oral exam with me. There are, of course, some problems, and the problem are the two main problems of this is difficult for some students to read a book in year 2. Some people can't simply say, for me it's too difficult, for me it's too much, I cannot finish it because I'm not used to read, even in my own language. It's difficult to keep their attention on the text when I am online. When I'm in class, it's easy because I can point, can call people, can actually, you continue reading, what do you think? Online, it seems to me that is not the same thing. In particular, when I'm online, it's difficult for me to explain particular part, because if I'm in class, I simply write on the board. It's not the same to use the electronic whiteboard that I have when I'm online, because I have to type, and it takes me a bit more time. It doesn't seem to me that it's so effective. And one of the most difficult things that I found is that it's difficult to ask them to comment when I'm online. When they are in class, it seems easier for some reason that I know. But when I'm online, they seem that they don't want to comment. In general, all in all, I personally think that the benefit, however, outweigh the difficulties. And if I can read you one of the students' comment, they were extremely positive. One of the students' comments, let me see, is here. He said, although I understand that it is difficult to read a book and to some extent even the short story, I think that I have improved my vocabulary, improved the ability to speak Italian, improved my understanding of the Italian language. Another student said, I feel more confident, and that is very important, I really like it. I feel more confident in speaking in front of people, because now I'm used in speaking in front of the class and in front of the teacher. In concluding this paper, I would like to thank Visya and Alvise for the possibility that they've given to me to present the combined use of short story and literature in the text. And if you have any question at the conference, I hope I will be able to answer your question. Thank you very much, all of you, for your time and your attention.